Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Danielle Snyder. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a wellness coach, and I am excited to offer this presentation to you all on behalf of HPHC and the Tufts Health Plan. Talking about boundaries is one of my favorite topics. Well, also one of the most challenging topics to discuss because it is not something that we prioritize in teaching. And we are often taught to establish boundaries based on other people's needs. So it's exciting and new and fun to kind of discuss a different way to set boundaries so you can live your healthiest life, as well as helping support other people living their healthiest life. I've gotten in the habit of starting these presentations with a brief meditation. And my thought process behind that is it helps you get centered and grounded and stay really present for the discussion we're about to have. So I'm going to actually ask that you start by establishing boundaries in your little space that you're in. And what I mean by that is turn off your phone or turn it over, shut the door, and turn off email, turn off notifications, do everything and anything you can do in order to be present and be a part of this moment without any distractions. That is also another form of boundaries. So I'm going to have you first take a deep breath in through your nose and exhale through your mouth. You may close your eyes if you'd like to. And I'm going to start by using this meditation I learned from this meditation network. And we're going to start by setting an intention for the day. And it's going to go, may I gain clarity on the boundaries I need to feel more joy in my life and release any judgments that may arise. And may I be bold as I claim them. Lower your hands and settle deeper into your sitting position. Let the warmth of your calming breath pull you in deeper. Be here. Breathe in and breathe out, letting any thoughts float away. Now take a moment to think about a recent time where you felt anger, stress, or frustration. Try to see those moments without connecting to the emotions that they brought. Now take a look and ask yourself this question. Was there a boundary I could have set that would have prevented these emotions? Perhaps you could have said no. Perhaps you could have been more diligent about your schedule. Maybe you could have asked for help. Give yourself a moment to simply sit with any of the answers that come up for you. And most importantly, try to let go of that self-judgment that may also come up. Now take a deep breath in, inviting in courage and strength. And as you breathe out, relax. Today's practice is a reminder that when you feel anger, stress, or frustration, it could be a warning sign that a boundary might be off. So be kind as you learn how to set these boundaries and protect yourself. We're going to finish by taking another deep breath in through your nose and exhaling through your mouth. And rejoin this moment. Okay, we're going to get started. I have a lot to cover in a short period of time, but I will do my best to not talk fast or overwhelm you with the information. I think this subject is so important that sometimes I get excited about it. Okay, there's a question. Can you repeat the intention that you said? I can. I closed out of that box. I will get back to you at the end with that. Or actually, you know what? I'm just going to do it right now. The intention that I said, may I gain clarity on the boundaries I need to feel more joy in my life and release any judgment that may arise. And may I be bold as I claim them. And what I will do is I will pop that into the chat. So if you want to put it somewhere, write it down. It can be a really helpful reminder. So the first thing I like to talk about with boundaries is the definition of boundary. It can be really difficult to even know what a boundary is. And so I like to just start here. Healthy boundaries are a key element in your physical, mental, and emotional health. One of the challenging parts about boundaries is they do look different for each person and relationship. They may change over time. Healthy boundaries are bi-directional. They involve communicating your wants and needs in a relationship, and while also learning how to respect other people's boundaries. So this is clearly a difficult subject because it's not just, I'm going to set this one boundary this one time, and then therefore everyone will respect it. It is an ongoing process. And I like to also start by kind of giving some definitions of what example of healthy boundaries are. Asking permission, thinking about another person's feelings when you are setting a boundary, and then still setting that boundary. Being honest, giving space when someone asks for it, sitting even with the emotions, even when it feels uncomfortable, saying no and accepting when others say no, valuing your personal boundaries and not compromising them, engaging in appropriate sharing, not letting others define what you need, knowing that your needs and feelings are just as important as anyone else's, knowing that you have rights to emotions, even if others don't understand it, respecting others' values, beliefs, and opinions, while knowing that you do not have to compromise your own beliefs or values. I'm just pausing so that can sink in a little bit, because it's very powerful to think what boundaries represent. So there are 7 types of different boundaries. And the first one is physical boundaries, which is a little bit, well, that's not even true. I was going to say it's a little bit easier to define, but for a physical boundary is different for everyone. And so a lot of times when I think about physical boundaries, I think about when I was, sorry, that was my dog shaking. I think a lot about when I was a kid and I was taught that my physical body was not necessarily mine. And I was taught this through, oh, your grandma and your grandpa are coming, give them a hug. You love them. Or, oh, here's my old family friend. Say hello, give a hug. Oh, we shake hands. Oh, it's okay if you feel uncomfortable. You have to sit in this room with all these kids and be here. And while I don't think that was intentionally a way that we were taught to, like, let me reframe this. at that time when I was raised, it was more important to be polite and passive than it was to set your own boundaries. Research has now shown that it's not healthy or helpful for kids to have to be put in compromising situations where they don't feel safe. And now that doesn't mean that they shouldn't go to school. That doesn't mean that they don't have to do chores. I'm not saying kids can do whatever they want, but we have to teach kids, as well as teaching ourselves as adults, that it's okay to say no if we don't feel comfortable. So if someone wants to shake your hand and you don't want to, it's okay to say, I'm not shaking hands these days. Or if someone wants to give a hug and you don't feel comfortable with it, it's okay to say, I don't want to have a hug, which is really difficult when for most of our lives we have been taught, do not offend that other person. And that's why I share about childhood, because I think it's an interesting theme or thread to match when you think about how setting boundaries as an adult is really challenging things that you've learned as a child. So physical boundaries are really difficult because my physical boundary can be different than someone else's physical boundary. I know there are a lot of people out there who are close talkers. I'm not a close talker. I like space. And so I've had to get better at being like, I'm going to back up a little bit, or I might say something compassionately, but also, can you give me some space? The next boundary that I like to talk about is emotional or mental boundaries. This is also they're all complicated. I'm going to stop saying that this is a complicated one, because it allows us to give space to other people for having their feelings while also knowing that we may disagree with their feelings. Oftentimes, a way we disregard people's other feelings is by minimizing them or saying they shouldn't feel that way or trying to make them feel better. So a way in which we hold space for emotional boundaries is by validating someone's experience. So even if we don't agree with it, even if we think it's silly, we still acknowledge that that is their experience. Everyone has a right to feel how they feel. That doesn't mean they have a right to disrespect you or be cruel or treat you poorly. But if someone says, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm happy, whatever it is, they're entitled to that. You are also entitled to feel that way, even if it doesn't always make sense to you why you're feeling that. There are also sexual boundaries, spiritual or religious boundaries, financial boundaries, time boundaries, and non-negotiable boundaries. So one of the challenging parts about learning how to set boundaries is you have to know what your boundaries are. And an even more challenging part about it is you have to be able to communicate. It is very often that we expect other people to know our boundaries or read our minds, because it is so clear in our mind that we wouldn't handle that situation that way. Why would someone else? As someone who works in the field, it is really easy for me to read body language, read people's communication. And sometimes I get stuck in that moment of being like, how is someone else not feeling this? Like, how do they not sense my discomfort or sense that they're too close into my sphere? But the reality is that people are focused on different things. And so kind of the first step of boundary setting is learning what you need in order to feel physically, emotionally, sexually, religiously safe. So I'm going to pause for a second and have you kind of think to yourself, what is an important boundary for me? If you're feeling very brave, you can pop it into the chat. I know a challenging boundary for myself is time. And I'm a very structured person. And so when people are late, it can be very difficult for me. And what happens is if I don't say anything, I start to get really agitated and frustrated. So I have adopted a boundary for myself where if someone is 10 minutes late, I send them a message and I'm saying, I'm sorry, it's not going to work on my schedule. We're going to have to reschedule. The first time I set that boundary, it was extremely difficult because I felt bad. I've never done something like that before. Setting a boundary is really uncomfortable. And so I went back on my boundary, which then taught that person that it's okay. Because there are all these little interweaving messages in our behavior and our actions. And how confusing is that? I say to someone's late, 10 minutes late, I message them, I'm like, I can't wait any longer. And then they're like, oh, well, blah, 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 blah. I'll be there in 3 minutes. And I'm like, oh, okay. So the next time, what do you think happened? That person was even later. And as frustrated I was by that experience, it was a really good informational session for myself because I learned I am teaching people how to treat me. Even when it is very uncomfortable to hold boundaries, you are sending that message of your needs, and your needs are important. What can happen a lot of times when we start setting boundaries after not setting boundaries is people are upset. And I'm smiling a little bit because I often think about, well, myself when someone sets a boundary. And generally, if I'm upset, it's because it's going to impact how I choose to do things. We are creatures of habit. And when someone changes up the patterns of behavior that we're used to, it can be difficult to adjust and adapt. And a lot of times it's frustrating because then I may have to do more work or I might have to change the way I'm doing, but it's not necessarily personal to the individual setting the boundaries. It is about me. And that is a really important thing to remember when you are setting boundaries. Just because someone reacts or is frustrated, that can be based on a whole host of other things happening within their life. They're used to you being that yes person. And now that you're saying no, they have to do it themselves. Or let's say the late situation. That person has to be on time. And that's not something that they like to do. And so it's important to remember that when you are first starting to set boundaries, it is helpful to do it with people who are really safe. And you can tell them, I'm working on setting boundaries. The smaller the boundary, the better, because we want to practice this. Cool thing is we're always getting opportunities to practice boundaries because people are always testing our boundaries. And you want to empower yourself to feel a little bit more comfortable before you go and you set a boundary that feels more intense or meaningful to you. So I want you to pause for a second and think about a small boundary that you could set and who you could try to practice with it. Again, if you're feeling very brave, you can pop that in the chat, but you also don't have to. Boundaries are important because if we are not setting them, we are negatively impacted by them. We're more frustrated, we're more exhausted, we're angry, we're upset. And so it helps improve our relationship with ourselves and with others when we set them. An example of a small boundary could be telling, I'm just going to use the late one example, telling your best friend or telling someone you're really close to, I am working on setting boundaries. I know sometimes we are wiggly on the time that we meet, but my schedule is really busy today. And so it'd be really great if we could both meet on time. Is that something you think you can do? They may say yes. Awesome. If they say no, it's another opportunity to say, hey, this is really hard for me, but my schedule is really busy. Maybe we should reschedule. Small boundary, a little challenging, but it's with someone safe. When you're setting it with someone safe, it can be easier to then gain that comfort and courage, as well as expressing it. There's nothing that says you have to just set a boundary and it's got to be straight black and white. It can be colorful and you can say, this is hard for me. That is something I often say and elaborate to people when I am setting boundaries with them for the first time. I acknowledge that it's uncomfortable for me. I also acknowledge how important it is. So here are some thoughts or ideas of informational bits where it might be a good red flag to notice, okay, my boundaries are not being respected. So an example of that would be like letting other people define your time. Saying no makes you feel guilty or you're letting people down. Trying to please everyone. Accepting things even when you don't want to. Being unable to handle something just so someone can take care of it for you. Crossing someone's physical boundaries without permission. Letting someone touch you or have sex with you even if you don't want to. Doing something that is against your values, ethics, or moral compass. Those can be pretty heavy when you hear them the first time. And it's an important reminder of how detrimental it can be when our boundaries are not aligned with our values. What happens on the other side is often resentment, frustration, exhaustion. And we don't often realize that by making a clear, concise boundary, it could help us feel better in our day-to-day lives. A boundary is not a bad word. It does not mean you don't care. It's just how you're taking care of yourself. I statements are a really useful way to practice or to start setting those boundaries. And it can sound something like, I'm not comfortable with this. This isn't going to work for me. That's not an I statement, but it's talking about you. And that kind of encourages people to understand that you're doing it for yourself. And once you start to uncover your relationship with boundaries, you can see maybe how often your boundaries are being violated. And potentially what's underneath that. Why is it so important for you to please everyone? I often like to ask myself or my clients is, What happens if you say no? What happens if you ask for what you need? So I'm going to pose that question to you. What happens if you say no, or what happens if you ask for what you need? Well, there are a couple of different options. You can be respected and they can say, okay. People can be surprised. That's what someone put into the chat. Yeah. People can, I don't remember if I said the first thing, but people can agree with it. People can push back. Are the two most common responses. Yeah. Sorry, I'm pausing. I'm reading in the text or chat as well. So the two most common responses is people either say, okay, cool, or they say, that's not going to work for me. When you receive pushback, it is very common that you can have an emotional reaction to that. You can feel like you're not good enough. You can feel like you're letting down them. And so that is them also setting their boundaries. They are entitled to speak their boundaries as long as they're being respectful in their tone and language, but you can still say no. You get to evaluate if the feedback or pushback that they're giving you needs to influence your boundary. And after you think about it, you can make that decision and say, I hear you and I understand why that's important to you. Unfortunately, it's still not going to work for me. Another really helpful tip is taking space. So if you assert a boundary and someone comes back with pushback, you can say, that's an interesting perspective. I'm going to need to take a few minutes and see what my schedule looks like. You can then come back and say, yeah, I really thought I could do that. I still can't. And you might still get pushback. That's okay. That doesn't mean that you have to change how you are managing that. Pushback is their issue. And I'm going to keep reminding you of that, of when someone gives you pushback, that's because they're uncomfortable, because things are challenging when things change. What I am doing when I'm setting new boundaries for the first time, or when someone else sets new boundaries with me, I say, thank you for taking care of yourself. Even if I don't agree with the boundary, even if it's really frustrating, even if it was a really hard boundary for me to set for myself, I just cue it in my head. Who I said no to that person. Thank you for taking care of yourself, Danielle. Because it reminds me, I'm setting a boundary to honor myself. And if we are not honoring ourselves, we cannot show up as our best selves. So I'm going to encourage you today to start to take care of yourself by setting these small boundaries that will then be bigger. Excuse me. Excuse me. So we only have, told you it was going to be a lot of information in a short period of time. I have like a couple seconds left. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts before we have to jump off? I thought I entered it. Maybe it didn't go to you guys. Oh, nope. There we go. I think I got it that time. Yes, that's a great question, Maria. Someone dropped in the chat box, thought on setting boundaries, children, elders, people going through tough times. So what I encourage individuals to do when they are setting boundaries with any vulnerable population is to acknowledge and validate that it is tough for them. And that even though it is a tough, challenging time for them, in order for me to show up for them as my best self and help, this is how I need to take care of myself. What you're doing when you are setting those boundaries is helping them respect you as well. And it's okay to set boundaries with people who are struggling. It is also okay to encourage allocation of resources. So saying something like, I hear you're having a hard time. Who else is in your corner helping you? Or even, who else can we get on board to help us? Because we aren't needing to do it alone. And you should not be that only support system for that person in your life. And, with children, which can kind of sometimes parallel elders, let them have their feelings of frustration. So if a kid really wants something, you can say, yeah, I hear you. It's really hard when we don't get what we want. Yeah, you can cry. You can be frustrated. I'll give you 5 minutes, and then you need to come back and we can figure out how to move forward. Of course, I sound really calm saying this. When it is kids I'm dealing with, it's a little more frustrating. And so in those 5 minutes of that kid having a meltdown, you can also take a break. But the reality is boundaries keep kids safe. Boundaries keep elders safe too. We are not setting boundaries to harm people. We are setting boundaries in order for people to be safe. So if a kiddo wants more candy, but they haven't eaten food, yeah, it sucks. I feel you. You're validated. And then you get to move forward. And so the message I want to say loud and clear, or I hope I presented it as loud as clear, is boundaries are not made to hurt people. They're here to protect you and other people. We don't have to like boundaries that are being set. We don't have to have the people agree with the boundaries that we are setting, but they are taking care of yourself. And you cannot show up for other people if you are not taking care of your best self. All right. Well, I appreciate you all for coming and joining, and I hope you got some tips on boundaries and the intention. I actually dropped it in the chat this time, and I hope that you can practice some boundaries today.